Hello and welcome back to the Life on the Wrist podcast. Today we're going to go through a few things that have happened in the watch world over the last couple of weeks. I apologize for missing last week's episode, but we are back with a couple of interesting topics to discuss on the podcast. We're going to go through Swiss watch exports, which was actually a staple of Life on the Wrist for quite a while. We'll then look at a couple new watch releases as well. As I mentioned, we used to cover the Swiss watch exports every single month on the Life on the Wrist YouTube channel. There's a link in the show notes of this podcast if you want to check it out, where we discussed the changing trends in Swiss watch exports and how that was affecting sort of global markets for watches. It was quite interesting to do it at the time because this was sort of the lead up to the pandemic, and then also sort of some of the months as the world sort of emerged from the pandemic. So the results were quite interesting to track during that time. Obviously, Swiss watch exports have had their ups and downs, and I would definitely say that we're kind of looking at a decline year for Swiss watch exports after they published their results for June and obviously the first half of the year. They were published by the Swiss Watch Federation, and in that publication they confirmed a negative trend and negative forecast for 2024. Export figures were down at 7.2% for June and down 3.3% since the beginning of the year in value, and down 9.9% in volume year to date. So obviously that discrepancy is showing that volume was heavily impacted, and the watches that were exported were of higher value. What's really interesting when you think about it is 2023 was a record year, which really concluded a 3-year cycle after the COVID-19 pandemic, where watches really took off and sales really were at an all-time high. If you look at, as I mentioned, if you look at just June itself compared to June of last year, in units, it was actually down by 19.1%, and in value was down by about 6.8% just for wristwatches, which is really significant. If you look at the 12-month moving average, you basically see July of last year at a positive 11%, around a positive 11%, and every month since then, we've seen this decline in that moving average all the way down to where we are now, which is basically at zero. So definitely a tough year for Swiss watch exports, and I don't think it's going to change as we go into the second half of the year. One could speculate that now that we've got, I think economic data across some of the world has been published that are positives for loosening of monetary policy. So, for example, the ECB and the US Fed have both signaled that there's likely going to be some sort of rate cut that would take place this year. And this obviously allows more liquidity to get into the market and would allow for more investment into this sector and perhaps more disposable income for people to purchase on these watches. But to be honest, I don't know if that's going to have such an incredible impact, given the fact that both the ECB and the Fed in the US have been very, very tight in cutting rates, and I'm not sure if it will be substantial enough to turn this around. Additionally, the Chinese market has been, or I guess the Asian economies, specifically in China, have been really impacted economically, and there's definitely been a slump in luxury sales in this market. in the Chinese market, and that obviously is reflected in some of the main market figures that you see for this month. The top 6 markets in order were the USA, Japan, Hong Kong, China, United Kingdom, and then Singapore. What's really interesting is only the US, which was up 6.5%, and Japan, which was up 13.2%, were positive. If you look at China, it was actually down by 36.5%, which is fairly significant. A significant amount. Looking at the prices by category, what's quite interesting is kind of what I said in the beginning, where watches that are of higher value have seen less of a change compared to watches that are perhaps sub 3,000 Swiss francs. And so you have lower units sold, but higher values of a lot of those watches. And so basically what you're seeing is those who have additional disposable income can purchase those types of watches, whereas those who do not have, such liquid disposable income are feeling, I guess, the pain a little bit. I think there was also a really good rally in South American markets, which I think is quite a nice result as well. So not great for Swiss watch exports. I think, as I mentioned, the Swiss Watch Federation has forecasted a negative growth for 2024 as an entire year. So I think we'll continue to see some of that pain over the next, let's say, 6 months, 5 to 6 months. Anyway, on some positive news, I wanted to talk about a couple of watches that have been released. For those of you who are Formula One fans, you probably had seen the Tudor Black Bay ceramic with a blue dial on some of the wrists of some F1 drivers, specifically in the Red Bull camp. What's really exciting is they have actually released this version of the watch post the sponsorship in March 2024 of Tudor for Red Bull. It's not a limited edition piece, but it's a black ceramic Tudor Black Bay, 41 millimeters with an automatic movement with this really beautiful sort of ocean blue dial that I think is really attractive. The watch runs on the Tudor MT5602-1U automatic movement, 70 hours of power reserve, master chronometer certification. This is such a nice color combination. This is actually one of the first times where I've considered looking to see if I could find one of these. I've worn Tudor Black Bays in the past and enjoyed them, but moved on quite quickly. But I really love this color combination. As you know, I love blue dials, and so it's always nice to see a new blue dial watch being released. And I do think it's really nice. Quite interesting that it's not limited edition. I would have thought it would, but I wonder if it's going to be harder to get allocated this piece from Tudor. We'll have to see how that goes over the next couple of months. But what a wonderful color combination. Next, I want to discuss Furlan Marri, which is a brand that got a lot of, over on Instagram, a ton of coverage of this brand, releasing a really cool sort of disco volante shaped watch. It's a 38 millimeter stainless steel piece that brings to life this sort of Italian disco volante shape that is pretty iconic of the some historical brands, Patek Philippe being one of them, Audemars Piguet being another. And they released these watches in 3 different colors, one known as the Havana, which has a salmon and brown dial, Celeste, which has shades of blue and white, and then Verde, which is green and sort of a cream color. They all have sort of this semi-sector design to it, with applied hour markers at 12:03 and 9 o'clock, and a really nice sub-dial at 6 o'clock with the seconds indicator. It also has really nice luminescent material that lights up the dial, the sort of sector pattern dial really nicely. It's running on the manual wind Peseux 7001 movement, which is an ultra-thin caliber. What's really interesting about this piece, and when you look back at Disco Volante pieces, a lot of the times they were a little bit more dressier, smaller in size, so they're not sort of sporty, or they don't feel sporty in any way. But I actually think Furlan Marri has been able to kind of take the basic design for this piece and really give it a sporty feel to it. Maybe it's a stainless steel case metal. Maybe it has to do with the fact that it is a 38 millimeter piece. It could also be this sort of double-stepped case that they've created, and the overall sort of aesthetics and finishing of the stainless steel. Whatever it is, they've really done a nice job of bringing a really sort of iconic case shape and giving it a really nice sporty feel, which I really love. It's priced at $2,780 US. I'm not sure what that is in euros. It's not limited edition at all. They're available, I think, online pretty easily. So overall, I think it's a really nice watch. Cool that they are playing around with this design and bringing it to life, especially for collectors who are interested in these vintage Disco Volante pieces but want something a little bit more modern and sporty. The last piece I wanted to discuss was a collaboration that was released by Hodinkee with Porsche Design. Hodinkee does a lot of collaborations, but the Porsche Design was a watch that brings together, I think, some of the enthusiasm that a lot of watch collectors have for cars and vice versa. Car people have enthusiasm for watches. And they released the Chronograph 1 limited edition for Hodinkee. Quite a cool piece. I think the launch of this piece was actually in Japan. There was a big Hodinkee event that took place where they released this in collaboration with Porsche. And it sticks very closely to the original FA Porsche's specifications and kind of have updated it, or the way that they describe it is it's been updated to the modern era. It was designed, developed, and handcrafted in the Porsche watch factory in Solothurn, Switzerland. And I think is a fairly cool watch. It's a 41 millimeter wide watch with a ultra light titanium and matte black titanium carbide coating cased. It then has its iconic 6-9-12 sub-dial layout with a 30-minute counter on the top, 12-hour counter at the bottom, and running seconds at 9 o'clock. I think it brings to life the original Porsche design for this watch that it was intended to be. What's really cool is the date wheel. They describe it as paying homage to the Porsche design and Hodinkee fan community in Japan, and they have the day display at 3 o'clock is available in both English and Japanese. So I thought that was kind of a cool little factor that's a little bit different. It's a numbered edition, as I mentioned, 350 pieces. To some collectors, this will be a very interesting watch. Some people won't be very interested in it. I know that the launch event was quite fun. It's what I heard about it and sort of saw on Instagram. It's not my type of watch, but a cool piece that's been released. I would hasten to guess that all 350 pieces are likely sold out. That would be my guess. Actually, I'm looking at the Hodinkee shop and they are all sold out. So probably going to have to find these on the secondhand market somewhere. If you are a Porsche lover and would like to get your hands on this specific limited edition. Anyway, I think that will about do it for this week's episode of the Life on the Wrist podcast. As always, there'll be links to all of the things that we discussed in this podcast in the show notes of this episode. So be sure to check out the show notes. You can also check out our social medias in the show notes as well. If you are not following this podcast, be sure to follow us And if you wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. It would also be great if you could share this episode or this podcast with a friend who might be interested in watches. And if you wouldn't mind, giving me some feedback, really. I would love to cover the topics that you want to hear on this podcast. So be sure to send us a message on our social medias or on lifeonthewrist.com. With this said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Life on the Wrist podcast, and I will catch you in the next one.